Hello.
And now, everybody, joining us right now is Kriss Hall, a veteran, an author, TV host, attorney, public speaker, and educator on all matters relating to the American our Constitution here at the United States. I love it so much, and so does she. She's joining us right now. Again, thank you so much for being with us, Kriss.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, you know, Kriss, every time you come on, I make sure that I have a question on a topic that I know will leave us all better in the end for knowing a little bit more about, because as you know, you turn on the television, you get talking points and you get soap opera drama, but you don't get history and you don't get any kind of understanding of, just procedure, basic procedure with our government. And, the first issue of the night, I have a little bit of a preface for you. So if you'll just allow me a minute, I'd like to preface this. Last Saturday, the state of Connecticut, the state Senate, voted in favor of a measure to give the state's electoral votes to the presidential candidate who wins the national popular vote. Now, according to The Hill, this move puts the state in a position to become the 11th in addition to Washington, D.C., to join an interstate compact to pool their electoral college votes for a candidate who wins the popular vote. Now, of course, I know Connecticut is firmly Democratic, but they're essentially saying that even if the people of Connecticut wanted to make a change in the way that they voted and the state magically went red or green or anything that wasn't blue, they would prefer that Los Angeles and the 5 boroughs of New York City make the decision for them. How do you even begin to unpack something like this?
The bottom line is that once again, we're not teaching the Constitution properly, so we don't even understand what's going on. And this national popular vote deception that is falling across America is really it's just as wicked as it is bizarre, because what's happening now is what we have people who are in power who are convincing the people that have elected them that they need to simply relinquish their vote altogether. And when you tell them that that they're not actually going to be voting anymore, they don't understand that, because they're sold into this whole democracy thing and one voice, one vote. And what the problem is that because we don't teach the Constitution, we don't know why the process of the Electoral College was originally established to begin with, and that the Electoral College was established to ensure that the person elected to be president of these United States would accurately represent the Union as a whole, not favoring certain states while ignoring the others. You see, the president, this is the big deception. The president of the United States is not a representative of the people. The president of the United States is the representative of the states. And so because we have fallen ignorant to the purpose of the Constitution and why we created the Constitution and the purpose of each of the 3 branches of government, we think that we have a king that represents the people of the United States. So we get really upset. Certain people get really upset when the president they voted for is not the president that's elected, because then they think, oh, I'm being denied my voice. No, your voice doesn't exist in the office of the president. Your voice exists in the House of Representatives with your representative. The purpose of the Senate is to represent the states, and the purpose of the president is to represent the Union as a whole in foreign affairs.
Thank you for putting it into such a concise way. Because like you said, it's just the perception of what everybody's role is has been so badly damaged, neglected, but also just taught the wrong way. Because, if most people have never even picked up their state constitution. Most people don't even know who their representative is. And as far as and one night I would love to bring you on to talk about the 17th Amendment. I'd love to talk about the Senate a little bit more. That is very, very interesting stuff. But, maybe that actually gives us a chance to shift gears to the second topic I want to bring up with you. This week, since we're talking about the Senate, this week we have been able to revisit the fabled Iran nuke deal. And much of the conversation has been about, on the news at least, has been about whether or not it's an attack on President Obama's legacy and how it will impact the world. But some people have been fine focusing on a much more fundamental issue here, and that's what we've been doing on this show, and that is how this deal was even passed in the first place. The method that was used. More specifically, we focused in on how Bob Corker and Ben Cardin flipped the treaty clause of the Constitution on its head to get this thing passed in what is pretty much just the reverse of what Article 2 says needs to happen. Could you first highlight the difference between what a treaty is and what an accord is, and the role that Congress plays in both?
All right. So the Iran deal was never legally passed. Okay. It doesn't matter what senators do. It is not a legally binding deal. There is absolutely no provision within the Constitution whatsoever that allows for that kind of agreement to be made. It just doesn't exist. The only kind of agreement that can be made pursuant to the Constitution legally is a treaty. And a treaty is only legally made when it meets two specific standards. Standard number one, it must be approved by 2/3 of the Senate. And number two, it must be consistent with the powers that are delegated through the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 tells us that all treaties must be approved by 2/3 of the Senate. Article 6, Clause 2 tells us that all treaties must be made consistent with the Constitution. The Iran deal is neither. So this is not about overturning the legacy of Barack Obama. This is not even about setting aside any legitimate action by any president or any two senators. This is about setting aside something that was completely unconstitutional, which our founders, in their own words, both James Wilson, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, all referred to as something that had no force of law and was completely null and void.
See, and that's another one. It's just so refreshing to hear it be said in such a way. And because when I'm watching this, and then we had to dig it up again, because when we talked about this in 2015, I remember reading into it and looking at what Ben Cardin and Bob Corker had put forward. And as you just said, 2/3 of senators you know what? Before I get into that, can you tell us what is the actual language? 2/3 of senators present mean? Present.
Well, it means however how many senators you have in the Senate.
Just in session, or people who are
people who are senators.
Right.
You can't have a session of Senate without having a quorum of senators. Okay. So you can't say, oh, well, there's 3 senators present and we all agree. Okay. That's not what that means.
Okay.
They're talking about having the senators who are actually there. I mean, what we're talking about is a growing Senate. So at that time, there's 2 senators for every state. There are 13 states. Now there are 50 states with 2 senators for each state. That's what it's referring to, having the senators present.
Okay. Yeah. I wanted to clarify that. I was just like, could it be just whoever was in the room? Is that what present meant? Yes. Yeah, so that would be. No. But that's what I'm talking about here, and I'm glad you brought that up, and I knew that you would. But 2/3 to approve a treaty, and to think that it was by what kind of magic? I know that Ben Cardin and Bob Corker use this arbitrary language to call it a non-treaty deal, which I don't even know what that means. A non-treaty deal.
It is completely nonsensical. It means nothing at all. And what it does mean is that it has no legal force of law whatsoever. It's funny because our founders were very, very clear about this. First off, what they did to circumvent the Constitution can't be law anyway, because it was never ratified as a law, right?
Exactly.
The House and the Senate and the President did not sign it into law, so it can't be a law. And so not only that, even if it were a law, they could not make this law because it is contrary to the Constitution. You see, this is, these politicians and the legal scholars, they all try to tell you can't possibly know what the founders meant when they wrote the Constitution. which is deception in its highest degree because they wrote reams and reams and reams and were very, very clear about what they wrote. Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federalist 78, no legislative act contrary to the Constitution can be valid. James Wilson, in the ratification debates, speaking about the power of Congress, he says the power of the Constitution predominates. Anything, therefore, that shall be enacted by Congress contrary to the Constitution will not have the force of law. Over and over again, they told us Congress does not have the authority to make stuff up as they go along. The Constitution is the standard, and anything beyond that standard is simply null and void, and it has no force of law. And so what they did to try to invent this new power, this new classification of agreement, foreign agreement,
a non-treaty agreement. I couldn't believe what I was reading when it first came out. I said, what the hell is a non-treaty agreement? And instead of 2/3 to approve, you need at least 2/3 or 67 to override a presidential veto to block it. So who the hell I don't even get. That's just like fantasy stuff. It's almost like playing poker with a 3-year-old, and every card in their hand to them is higher than your card, even though they only have a mixed number of 2s, 3s, and 4s. It's just ridiculous.
Well, this is just typical of what we should expect from them, because for decades now, Congress has been shirking its responsibility and hiding its accountability by trying to pass off its responsibility to the executive branch. And that's exactly what they're doing here. The president is going to make a really crappy deal that's going to get us into a lot of trouble. It's going to, it's going to hurt America, but it doesn't matter because we didn't have anything to do with it. And even if the president makes it, we've made up this process that says we can't overturn it. So there you go. We're going to point our fingers at the president and blame him. Well, now what they've done is slap themselves in the face, right? Because now they have a president that says, no, we're not doing this. And they've created a situation where they can't do anything about it. So the real problem is the power of the treaty was bifurcated between the president and the Senate because our founders did not want the president to become a king. And in kingdoms, the king alone makes a treaty. So they wanted to make sure that the states who would have to abide by that treaty were in the situation to approve that treaty. Because presidents don't make treaties. Presidents negotiate treaties. The Senate makes the treaty law.
What about the difference of an accord? What's an accord versus a treaty?
Accord. There is no such thing as an accord in the Constitution.
Oh, okay.
There is no such thing as an accord in the Constitution. There are no such thing as sanctions in the Constitution.
Yeah, that's another thing I wanted to ask you about too. As far as the deal, now we're talking about the legitimacy of this deal in the first place, but let's get down to what's inside the deal, whether it be putting sanctions on someone or relieving sanctions on someone. What is the whole? Where do economic sanctions come from? Who has the power of doing that? What must be done for anything like that to actually be legal? What's the whole situation with sanctions in general?
It would have to be a matter of a treaty agreement. Now, a treaty is a contract. Okay, so it's a contract between these United States and a foreign country. And so any kind of agreement between a foreign government to or for or against another country has to be made via a treaty in this contractual agreement. It has to be consistent with the Constitution, and it has to be approved by the Senate. It's really sort of amazing. Jefferson said in 1793, he said, I insisted that in giving to the president and the Senate a power to make treaties, the Constitution meant only to authorize them to carry into effect by way of treaty any power they might constitutionally exercise. He says, by the general power to make treaties, the Constitution must have intended to comprehend only those subjects which are usually regulated by treaty and cannot be otherwise regulated. It must have meant to accept out of these the rights reserved to the states. For surely the President and the Senate cannot do by treaty what the whole government is interdicted from doing in any way. So the Constitution, by Article 6, Clause 2, limits treaties to the powers that are delegated to the federal government via the Constitution. That would be commerce.
Mm.
Okay? So treaties making commerce, treaties making peace, treaties making war. That's the treaty authority of the federal government.
So,
Period.
so as far, do you know anything about these sanctions that have been put on Iran? Were those sanctions done through the treaty process in the first place?
Well, not if they were done through the Iran deal. They were not, because the Iran deal is not a treaty.
Okay. Well, Kriss, this is well. I got to thank you. These were two really, really important topics to me, and they were very relevant in the last couple of weeks. That Connecticut and the Electoral College, and this one. Obviously, we're all talking about the Iran deal right now. So this was so helpful. I thank you. And
yeah, it's so frustrating to me because we have all of these talking heads with their picked experts, and no one is talking about the constitutionality of this stuff. And so the American people can't even make an educated decision about this. I have two articles on my website. One is called UN Treaty C, Treaty Gun Treaty, What Are We to Do? It's all about treaties at chrisannhall.com. And I also have an article at chrisannhall.com called Disenfranchising the Voters, all about the Electoral College. And so we have courses at Liberty First University that will teach you, but these two articles on my website, chrisannhall.com, are available there for anybody to go and share and print out, and they're free. So if we want to get educated, it's there. We just got to stop listening to these mainstream media talking people who just pool their ignorance and deceive and deny Americans the real truth.
It's exactly what it is, because, whereas you are educating so many people just right now in a way that they would never get on television. All you get on television is this sanctimonious garble about traditions and legacies and being mean and all this stuff. Like, what are you talking about? It's just what about the law? What about the thing that's supposed to keep everybody, no matter what party they belong to, in check, so that we don't have to worry about traditions or your personal feelings and any of that stuff. So it's really amazing, and I'm happy that part of my summer reading list is Sovereign Duty is on that. It just came in a couple of weeks ago, so I can't wait to sink my teeth into that. Everybody check out chrisannhall.com, buy all of her books. What's your summer speaking schedule like? Are you going to be making the rounds?
Oh, yeah. Well, we're actually in New York right now. We are finishing up our Liberty tour here in New York. We've been in New York for 2 weeks.
You should have came by.
We were on Long Island for a week, and now we're in Buffalo.
Oh, okay. Well, you're Buffalo. Long Island, I was closer to you in Long Island. Buffalo, you're a walk. Yeah. Next time you're in the tri-state area, you just gotta let me know, because I'd love to have you in studio. We can do a full hour together if you want.
That would be so much fun. That would be so much fun.
Well, Kriss, thank you once again. It's been great to have you on, and I am sure to talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you. Anytime.
Take care. Bye-bye.